I made a historical castle on Roblox. I've made many in the past, but this is probably the best as far as historical accuracy. It is the castle of Belvore in the Levant, which is historically a hospitaller castle for the Crusaders during the 12th century. I made this castle for the Teutonics in the game. Sometimes you just have to make a few changes based on, what the game needs for balance, but this was technically a hospitaller fortress. You can see here, the first thing I'm doing is I'm actually outlining a actual render of the floor plan for the castle based on an archaeological dig. So the first thing I do is I make sure the image is square in Photoshop or Paint.net, and then I upload it and make sure the brick dimension size is squared, so 500 by 500 or 600 by 600. Now the toughest part about this is scaling it. You need to understand what's going to be the actual stud to meter or yard ratio. I don't always do this, but there is a way to figure it out if you really want to get nerdy and make it the exact size. The problem is the ratio is not always perfect for a Roblox character. Roblox characters, as you're going to see in a minute, are just very chunky and they're less tall. So sometimes I can make the dimensions in the hallways way smaller than they need to be. So what I did first was I, made the outline, then I had to redo it because it was just a little bit too small for the Roblox character to fit through some of the hallways. So this castle might actually be a little larger to scale than it would have actually been, but that's okay. At this point, now that, the historical outline was done, I'm just sort of filling things in. I'm coloring the bricks to make them a little bit less obvious. I start with bright green just because it's the easiest to see. And at this point, I'm just, making this floor plan come to life, making the height come to life. You can see, just paying attention, I'm only using 1 increments. So the bricks are literally 1 by 1 across, or 50 by 50, but never decimal points. I'm never using 1.5 or 1.23. And the reason for that is it just makes things so much easier to put into place. I know there's a lot of plugins that help with that, but honestly, just building things with correct dimensions is just so much easier, because by using these 1 increments, I'm actually able to fit those things in without having to use those plugins. And then mathematically, everything fits up and aligns properly later. So I know all the walls are exactly, I think in this case, they're about 6 to 8 studs thick in different places. The outer walls are very thick. They're about 20 studs thick. And the height of each floor is, probably about 20 studs. So the first floor is 20 studs. The second floor is 40. The third floor is, 60. That just makes things a lot easier. Here I'm adding some of the interior stairs. And again, this is what we would call a blockout. So none of this is actually, final product. But you can see here, this is what the outline sort of looks like slowed down. Just giving you an idea of what does this floor plan actually look like. You can see a picture of the castle up on the top of the screen. That's what we're trying to go for. And here's what a bird's eye view would be. And just deciphering what wall is what place goes where, I had my historical team sort of do some research and tell me. So later on, when I'm actually filling up what's inside them, it was a lot easier. So at this point, the general outline and blockout is done. And now I'm actually going to start modeling. So if you are using, let's say 3D, sometimes people can just, make something in Blender, and I recommend that if you can. I've never liked doing that, and the style of this particular game has never been just purely that. We use those for supplementary models, not necessarily something like a wall. So in this case, I was actually making this wall earlier as a tutorial showing the level design team, how to model and build with increments. And I'm using mostly 1 increments, but I actually go down to 0.5 and 0.25 as well. So I built that entire wall, and I'm doing this modularly. So I've got my 1 wall section, and now I've also, got this entire outline of the castle done. So it's already starting to look like a castle. This didn't take much time at all, but you're going to see later all the detail work, the texturing, the brick outlines, the tiling, and the interior design specifically is going to be super time intensive. So this part is actually, some of the more fun parts. All right, so now I'm going to be putting this wall I made into the blockout. So I'm basically fitting it in exactly where, 1-to-1 where it should go. And then I'm changing everything. And I'm only going to do this in 1 spot to start. And I'm going to see how I like it. So I start in this 1 section. And essentially, I'm just, moving these brick stencils. These are sort of my details, and I'm just lining everything up. Now, one thing I did is I actually changed the color of this wall, and I name all the parts you can see on the top right of the screen. I name every single part that has a different color or scheme or style or material, something different. So that way, if I want to change the color scheme later, if I'm like, this doesn't look great, or I want to do this, all I have to do is search in the workspace for what I want to change that color to, and then I just select them all, and it takes 1 second. Otherwise, you have to write, a script to do it, and it's not always reliable. That could be tough. So I'm actually replacing my blockout blocks here, but I could have also just recolored and renamed them. Either one works. The recolor and rename them probably would have been faster in hindsight, but, it is what it is. So most of the work here and time is putting up these crenellations, which are the barriers on top of the walls that are meant to protect archers. They're meant to act as sort of defenses for defenders. And because I used 1 increments, I actually got them all to fit basically perfectly even. And, just that's another example of why using 1 increments are so helpful, because on these awkward corners and stuff, it still ends up looking very good. And there's only a couple sections where you have these weird angles like this one, where, it ends up being a little bit more difficult. But again, you just do your best and you make sure the spaces between each one is like 2 studs, as I did here. And you always want to make sure that before you build stuff like this, and I did this earlier, you're checking for the scale, because you don't want to model resize things later if it's too big or too small. You want to make sure from the beginning, okay, this is the appropriate size. So actually pressing play and going in and testing it is super important. And we're continuing to speed through here, these crenellations as I keep doing it. I do use this pattern tool with Build Edit, which is super helpful for just, repeating a pattern and saving you some time. Here we can see I am, just doing the actual roof or ceiling of these walls, and these awkward angles is what makes it tough. If this was a perfectly square castle, this build would have been, 2 to 3 times easier. These awkward little angles do make things difficult, even when you're using 1 increments, but I will say 1 increments makes them much easier than they would be otherwise. So I'm starting to hollow out some of these areas. I'm starting to put these walls up. I'm starting to realize I might have made these walls a little bit too thick, and later I actually have to deal with that. But again, with a realistic castle, you don't want the wall to be thin, because, it would just be blasted through. So that's why these walls were so thick. You can see I actually put the walls of the, I finished the main walls before I started on the towers, because it's just what I decided to do. I could have done it in either order. But now I'm actually, replacing the block out of the towers. And then shortly I'm going to actually, do the crenellations as well. Overall, this build took me about 50 hours to complete. So this half-hour video is sped up and a lot of it's cut out. But we're going to be releasing another video that shows every single part of it at, like 100 times speed or something super fast. It might take some time, but if you're interested in seeing every single step of the process, not just step, but like every single brick and part I move, I live stream this whole thing. And I'll be live streaming the building of Constantinople sometime in early 2026. So if you're interested in, learning about building or watching that, please come check out my stream. I'll be streaming regularly, probably around that time. Now, these are called brick stencils. These are basically how I design and add style. They're super annoying to add. And on something like Unreal Engine, you could just make it a texture. Now in Roblox, you can too. And I recommend doing that. The issue is I just don't like Roblox custom textures. I don't think they look good with our style. I think most of them are too busy. And they don't match the rest of the base. The point of this base was not to make something that looks fresh and doesn't match anything. It's actually meant to match the existing bases and look really clean. Now look at this. Super precise. We don't have a lot of clippings with bricks running into each other. And the castle's really starting to take shape. I mean, you could defend this position already. Now, there's not much detail and there's still a lot of work to be done. But you can see that the main block out of the castle is done. No interior work. None of that. You always want to start with the exterior first. Don't build inside out, build outside in. Just like if somebody was building a house. There's a reason people do that. So now I'm going to start on some of the tiling and the detail work. This could have waited till later, but at this point, I'm kind of just thinking of it's looking plain. I want to see what I'm going to do here to save parts. Because again, we're not doing these custom textures. So these parts do cost performance. Now, some of the things you can do to save performance, you're going to turn can collide off. You're going to make sure your settings are, like the players don't need to be rendering these fit in on the physics side of things. I don't just union everything. Use unions very sparingly. They're not actually that performant. I only use unions very rarely and on very small sections. So you can see already, I mean, the style, although it's a little bit like these tiles are kind of comically large and they're not everywhere. What they do is they give contrast and they break up monotonous things. Again, it's not going to look exactly like the castle did in real life, but because of the way like the Roblox lighting works, if you just have a big brick that's the same color, it ends up looking very ugly. So that's why we do these things. At this point, I've made my exterior and, because I didn't go inside out, I go outside in. I then have to find an interior that's going to fit with what I've already provided within the space I've provided. So I come up with this cool Teutonic cross shape here. That kind of looks like a subway station. But yeah, I decided to come up with this cool little cross thing to just give some, detail and contrast when you're walking around. It allows you to know where you are better. It just feels better aesthetically. And when we come back and add torches and models later, it's going to look even better. But a lot of people forget the ceilings, and the ceilings are extremely important, ceilings and floors. People will decorate the walls and the floors, but if your ceiling doesn't have good contrast and something cool to look at, I mean, it's going to be a boring build. Now I'm actually outlining doors and things to cut out for people to go to different places. So you can see here, I'm even coming up with a custom interior just for this one section. I thought about doing this in the entire area, but honestly, working with this sort of design is super cumbersome. And it also, I think it was just a little bit too busy. And I didn't actually want it everywhere. And you can see here, I'm actually cutting out each section and I have to, make it line up perfectly. And this just takes forever and it's very annoying to do. I like the way it came out. It's a cool section. It's a unique part of the castle. It's not anywhere else. And of course, we're using the color scheme that we wanted. So it matches and it's neat. It's only in this one section. So, adding little cool parts like that. So it's not just it's all 100% modular, looks monotonous, is like a nice thing to do. Like pick an area that you think, okay, let's make this area a little bit different. Let's make this thing a little bit different. Speaking of modular, this is my stair model that just wouldn't fit in this interior spot. And in that specific part of the castle, I was actually having trouble because of the way that things were lining up, not being squared, having difficult angles. And so I actually have a little bit of dead space, like a wedge of dead space in between the walls. Because of just improper planning and the way I traced things out on the castle was just not 100% precise. But again, at this point, it's too late to go back and change it. That's why getting your block out and your outline done perfectly is really important. Again, I'm adding tiles on the inside. If I added more tiles, it would look better. But again, for performance, I'm trying to optimize. This map ends up being extremely performant at the end, about 40,000 parts. Which is super low compared to some of my other builds in this game. So having a lag-free place where people can enjoy is really good. I'm continuing to outline different doorways, but no details really been added. You can see we have all the bricks on the castles and all that stuff, but this is just really, really big picture stuff. Nothing detail-oriented, nothing, maybe besides the ceilings. It's just getting the bare bones done. You're gonna work big to small. Start with the big and then go to the small because it's harder to change the big later. It's easier to change details at the end. You can see here we're starting to do some more ceilings, and I'm at least making the ceilings a different color, although the actual designs will come later. This is one of my favorite parts of the space, is this little arch design I come up with. This is the upstairs of the keep, which I've started on. So first thing I do is I make an archway, and I try to make it measured exactly a certain amount across. Because you're using arches and angles, it's really hard to do that. So the upper brick is actually a weird size, the top one that's squared, so that from the bottom across, it's the same, consistent size. And because it's the keep, I'm going to add a little extra detail. So I'm putting a few extra parts. I wouldn't want to do this in every part of the base because I think it would just be a little bit too much. But I'm starting to do some tile work, those arches came out really nice, and we're going to use those as a foundational piece to decorate the entire castle. Using tiles, make sure that they don't cut through the wall and are seen on the outside. You don't want any extra tiles taking up space that aren't actually being used. And here I'm actually designing some windows. So you can see here, I'm going through and cutting out windows and making a cool little cross window design. Again, now I'm going to 0.5 increments. It's basically just been one at this point, but it's still a few studs across whole, so that when I'm dragging it across, it's very easy to plug into a specific spot. I'm replacing all these doorways with these arch model that I use that I'm resizing because like a squared doorway is just pretty ugly. So you can see here, I'm actually, using that archway and using stuff that we've already used so it all matches and looks nice. You don't want too many things that are contrasting with your style. You have a nice style, you have a nice design, just keep it, expand on it and use it and repurpose different areas of it. And that's what I'm doing here. And these nice little gates work out really good. And so, again, without ever using model resize, I just find a way to fit it into the holes I need. You can see I'm doing that again here with the secondary inner gate. Speaking of these gates, this castle is insanely defensible, as we will see at the end. Very difficult to take, which the defenders like. We do put a little bit of a secret entrance in, just so it's possible to take. But essentially this castle, you could tell the way they designed it was just to be impregnable, and it basically was. Now I've made a little doorway because... the arches are too large to work on doors. And those doorways actually end up being too large again, so I have to make a new model that matches that just squared. Here's one of the, causeways leading out. And we are just continuing to rock and roll here with some of these new doorways. Doing some more interior work with the roofing. And now we're starting on kind of the fun area, which is the inner part of the keep and the throne room. And so I'm making some nicer pillars. And you can notice, I could have spent a lot more time doing the detail work on these, but I kind of like just keeping things simple. Especially on Roblox, I just, it doesn't need to be a crazy amount of part counts. Of course, you can do that if you want. It's going to look very nice. This doesn't end up being the most detailed throne room, but you can see how much I make work with little. Like, I don't spend that much time and I don't use that many parts, but the contrast in the bricks, the actual style I do use ends up looking quite nice in the end. And a lot of this work, it's not always sequential. I'm going back and forth. I'm doing things just as I see them. But you try to stay in order. You try to do one thing at a time. You can see an interior keep spiral stair that I made. And now I'm placing down these windows. And this part can be, pretty tedious. But, using the 1 increments makes it a lot easier. And everything's going to be precise. Perfectly aligned, perfectly in the right spot. Then I'm adding them to the walls as well, not just to the keep. Windows are an important aspect sometimes you can forget as well. Having natural light come in or just having a breakup in the monotony of a wall. Sometimes people can forget about that. I certainly did when I first started. At some point, I actually, I didn't think the window positioning looked very good, so I readjusted the height on the keep so it looked more aesthetic. You can just see me adjusting it and changing the height so I feel like it's, looks better. Okay, we're continuing to go here, placing those windows on the exterior walls and towers. I'm not actually putting them in the walls, only in the towers, because, it wouldn't really have a window coming out of a wall necessarily, make it a little bit weaker. So you could see these windows with that nice reinforced arch. And now we're starting on the chapel here, and, this is the pulpit. And I tried to make something a little bit nice. And this is where you really want to use 3D modeling, guys. Roblox modeling just ain't it compared to 3D modeling on Blender or something. And so I end up inserting a few 3D models here, but I do the best I can within like these increments without just wasting a insane amount of parts. Of course you can, just use a ton of parts and get pretty highly detailed models, but it's super inefficient. And a lot of this is trial and error. I'm trying different things. It's not always simple like, oh, I get it right the first time. Sometimes it doesn't look right. I delete it and I redo it. So I'm adding these candles and I'm playing with the color scheme and trying to find out what looks best for this sort of chapel inside this castle. Speaking of what I said earlier, we know a chapel was in this location in the castle, and we basically try to do that with everything we're doing here, making sure the thing's in the right position, but it's not always possible to tell. And there's so many gaps when you're doing something historically that you do have to improvise sometimes, and that's where creativity can really come in and say, oh, what could this have been used for? What do I want to put in here? And that's okay. You're still honoring it and being authentic. Adding some sort of pew models, or benches rather, adding a couple banners. And this is where we start to really get into more of the heavy interior design and starting to add models, like actual models, into the game, which are going to just make it feel a lot better and a lot nicer and less, empty. A lot of times this is my least favorite part that I do, is like actually including stuff in it. There's a joke, like I'm really good at making a big empty keep, but it's really important to fill up what you're building, like making it feel lived in, making it feel like a part of the world. And you can see here I'm actually including some extra designs on the ceiling here. And could I have copied these designs across the rest of the map? Yes, I could have. And it wasn't just laziness the reason I didn't, although I'm sure it's to some degree I didn't want to just keep going forever. The real reason you only keep it in one special area is you want an area to be special and distinct. And this is the highlight of the map. This is supposed to be the throne room. This is where people come to rally. This is where people have fun. It's supposed to be regal. And if every place looked like that, it just wouldn't be as special. So hanging up these banners and getting these interiors done, just looking a lot nicer. Adding some torches. Lighting is going to be a huge component of this. Adding lighting is, again, a tedious part, but necessary. So I'm adding these torches to every different section, and I'm making sure everything's just looking ship-shape. And then when I turn on the actual lighting of the game, you can see how much better it looks. I don't always build with that lighting because it's just kind of hard to see, but you can see when it's not all washed out how much better this map starts to look. Especially this throne room at night with this lighting just starts to look very, very nice. You have to imagine, you have to let people be able to see in these interior areas. So we're adding torches and just continue to add lighting across the map. And again, this is tedious and it takes time, especially making sure that these models line up perfectly with the wall. One of the issues I have with 3D models is it's really hard to make them a 1x1 increment. So it just becomes difficult to use them. But it doesn't really matter. Editing the actual main part of the base is what's important as far as the 1 increments. And if somebody wanted to edit this base, it'd be super easy because I use those 1 increments. It'd be very easy to do. Now, if they didn't use 1 increments, they'd just ruin everything and it'd make it very difficult. But for somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who knows the increment style, it'd be a lot easier. Now I'm adding some of these sort of torch baskets, I guess, if you will, to the outside of the walls as well, keeping soldiers warm during some cold Levantine nights. Trying to add some stairs because I realized that this actual top of the keep was inaccessible. So again, sometimes you realize that and you go, oh damn, I actually forgot about this. You have to go back and redo things. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. And we'll just continue with the lighting, You can see the castle's already looking very nice. And it's only going to get better, guys. We're really going. This is a cool part of the base I added, which is a little cistern, which a lot of these castles had. which was basically collection of rainwater or groundwater, which they would use to, have a water supply during a siege. So I made it as like a cool little tunnel connecting the keep to an outer area of the wall, playing with different color schemes. And I really like the way this one came out here. Then I'm going to add my water part. I think it's going to be replaced with terrain water later. Adding some torch baskets hanging from the ceiling. And now we're going to do some more defenses. So I'm adding my ballista mounts. I'm creating them with the same stuff and materials of the wall. So, they have to be elevated so they can actually shoot over the wall, although they don't actually currently work. This is more decoration, but again, we want it to look nice. Want it to look defensible. So that's why I'm doing this, and I realize it needs to be a little higher. Keep going. Boom, boom, boom. Lower in the front part so that people can actually shoot. And now I'm adding the actual gates that can open and close from the other models. Sometimes this is tough because they clip through the top of the wall, so I end up making a little bit of a hole so that they're meant to slide up and down. This is more me trying to fit in what we already do. Now I'm going to do the terrain height map. So this part takes a little bit of time, but I'm inserting terrain from the actual area of Belvore, having to get the scale right and having to put it in the exact right position. This can be tough. A lot of times I recommend you do this part first, but I figured it out and ended up getting it right. It's all just sand right now, and just because you import a height map doesn't mean you need to do no work. You actually have to do a lot of terrain work. It just saves you a lot of time and ends up looking a lot better than if you just do it all manually. So you can see here I'm flattening a bunch of areas. I'm making this hill more pronounced. But it's going to make it a lot nicer. And you can see, as we keep going, how nice castle on a hill here. Although with it all being sand, it does look pretty ugly and without any texture. So we're going to see what we do about that later. That's the little secret hole that people can get into. They have to crawl through that little thing. So it's a very narrow spot, and if defenders guard it, it's still tough. But this castle actually had a moat on top of a hill, which is super interesting. I don't know how they got the water up there. Either it's groundwater or whatever collected. But this castle not only has this crazy double wall, crazy triple gate, but it also has a moat. So getting that terrain right, outlining it with some rock, and this is where we first start to do a little distinction with the terrain, making areas look different and unique. So I'm kind of just outlining some rocks into different areas, and terrain work can be very difficult if you don't know what you're doing. It can end up looking very ugly. I have a certain amount of, as you guys can see, materials I like to use with building, but I also have terrain materials that I like using and terrain materials I don't like using. For this one, I'm basically only using grass, rock, and sand. And just with those three, and ground for the paths. And with just those four terrain, you can actually start to see it come together. So I'm making little different sections, painting it like an artist, just, based on what height of the area and trying to fill it in. And you can see it actually, it's starting to look okay, but it's still not quite what I want. So it's going to take me a while to actually figure out exactly what I want with this style. And there's a cool little tip I can show you guys as far as making it really nice. And then I'm just making most of it grass. I'm like, why is this mostly sand? That does not look right. I'm making it all mostly grass anyway. You can see here now I'm starting to use this grow tool. This is really what's nice. You use the sculpt tool, you set the intensity. You can set it high or low. I guess I'm using it pretty high here. And it comes out and it makes it super nice and organic. So that's what I did for the terrain. Now I'm coming back and I'm finishing just different areas of the castle I haven't. So we have these two different causeways, these little bridges that go over the moat. I'm using again that archway to complete that. And now I'm adding just different stuff that you need for the map for the game to work. So I'm adding barriers so people can't walk across. I'm not sure if I've done it yet, but at some point I need to hollow out the terrain. So I have a custom program that basically prunes the terrain and makes it so it's only 10 voxels thick instead of being hundreds of voxels thick.
I have to place down these individual spawners so that rock nodes spawn. So like this is a quarry, for example, I sculpted out of the terrain. You only want to prune the terrain after you're done doing the work with it, because if you need to do something like a cave or something, it becomes very difficult once it's pruned. These are all plant spawners, so I want a bunch of plants to grow on the outside of the moat. And I'm just placing these everywhere, and this takes a very long time. Unreal Engine's definitely a lot easier with that, because they have a foliage printer tool where you can just spray it around. And then I'm adding trees, and these trees are not just the tree spawners, but these ones just can't be cut down, so they're decor inside the castle. Would they have had trees growing inside the castle? Maybe not, probably not. But it is nice little decor. It makes it feel a little bit cooler, and why not add some trees, and also the markets in there. We're just wrapping up the final details, making it look lived in, making it not look monotonous. At this point, I'm importing parts from another place, because I don't feel like making a new house, but I'm gonna end up making a village, so but I end up changing a lot about these houses, and it takes a little bit more time than you'd think. For example, I'm going to change the color scheme, because I don't think that they quite match our map. But here I am making the village, making little paths. I make a tiny little path that goes to each door. Something a lot of people don't do is, or they'll just spam the dirt terrain or the ground terrain just around an area that should be walked. I do it very sparingly, only where I think people actually would be walking, because I do think it's very ugly when it's overused. Adding a stable here so people can access their horses. And a lot of this work and time just comes with, what this game actually has configured. So you have to add specific things for specific systems. We have to configure those houses so that, they work, and can be used with their instances. We're setting up the spawning. We're setting up this little bandit camp so that people can raid. And, we're just adding more and more props, making it feel nice. You don't want just the castle to look nice, You want it to feel like an area that's lived in, an area that people go to. Most of it's going to be wilderness, and that's fine. Speaking of wilderness, this is the battlefield map, and for this one I actually got creative. So I copied the place, and I used the terrain under the castle at the bottom of the hill for the actual battlefield map, and instead of just having a random place. And so if you look up in the battlefield map, you can see the castle. But what I actually did is I hollowed it out. The castle's mostly gone because you don't want it taking up performance, because you can't go up there. So this is a separate place, but I used all the terrain to save work and also make it look nicer. Now I'm kind of doing a walkthrough. I'm doing my test, and this part's really important. So I'm actually at the central Avant right now, which is the region that this place connects to. And I wanted to walk over there to test it. But here you can see, this is a shot of one of the final overviews of the castle. You can see how pretty it's starting to be, and we're starting to look, and we're not even getting to the total end, but we are wrapping up, and even in game with the custom lighting, it looks a lot nicer. And you could see me walking around here, and how nice that is. And we're gonna show that clip. And this castle's currently in game. It's called Belvore Castle. You can go and visit it. You can siege it. You can battle for it. And yeah, guys, thanks so much for watching this building tutorial video, how to make a medieval castle, and looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video.